Ready. Great. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, Cantor Kevin. Shabbat Shalom, Linda.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. All right. Let me just mute thing. And take that off. All right. Cantor, you're feeling good? Good. We'll put you up on the screen for the moment. You just get yourself ready. So both Shabbat Shalom and Moadim L'Simcha and the late Chag Sameach and eventually Chag Sameach again. We are entering Kol HaMoed Shabbat Pesach, and a wonderful chance to be back again after first time away in quite some time. Cantor Kevin did a great job making sure we were all taken care of last week while we were away, and a lot to talk about from our trip for sure. So we will get started right away. We're on page 120, and we'll light and bless our Shabbat candles. I'm not sure I can get them into my window quite so easily, but I'll put them right here. And I'm going to do the blessing here as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. And we'll turn it over now to Cantor Kevin, who's going to lead us through Kabbalat Shabbat. And I'll jump back here. And Cantor, thank you very much. We're on page 130.
Of course. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you and hearing your voices virtually, and to just celebrating Shabbat, even though we're a bit more distant than we would be. But for many of us, that's also not the case. So anyway, it's good to have everyone here. Again, page 130. Lechu neranena. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzor yishenu, nekadma fana v'toda. Naria, naria, letzor yishenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. We'll now continue with Psalm 96 on the following page. Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yiram hayam, yiram hayam, yiram hayam umelo. Yiram hayam, yiram hayam, yiram hayam umelo. Yismechu hashamayim, yismechu hashamayim, yismechu hashamayim, ותגל הארץ. Now continue with Psalm 97, the next in our list, or Zarua on page 132. Or Zarua HaTzadik U'lishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua HaTzadik U'lishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua HaTzadik U'lishrei lev simcha. U'lishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua HaTzadik U'lishrei lev simcha. U'lishrei lev simcha. Ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la ya la ya la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la ya la la. Continuing on page 134, Psalm 98, Zamru Ladonai. Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. 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 Romemu on page 135, Psalm 99. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו. We'll now move to Lecha Dodi on page 138. And again, we will sing verses 1 to 5 and 9. And if you are willing and able, rising on verse 9, either in body or in spirit. And for all of you, in order to still see me, I will stay seated, but please feel free to rise, and I'll try to signal that as well. Lecha Dodi again. Same melody as last week. Ya la 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 lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat nikabe, ya la 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 lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat. B'nei Shabbat nikabela, Shamor v'zachor, v'ribur echad, v'yishmianu el hamyuchad, Adonai echad, v'shemo echad, Shem ultiferet, v'lithilah, ya la 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 lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat nikabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelchai, ki mekor haberacha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshava, מחשבה תחילה, יא לה לה, יא לה 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 לה, lecha dodi, יא לה 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 לה, לקראת כלה, יא לה 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 לה, פני שבת, פני שבת, נקבלה. Verse 5, התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, אורי אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat nikabela. Now's the time when you may rise for the final verse. Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. דודי, יא לה 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 לקראת כלה, יא la 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 la, b'nei Shabbat, b'nei Shabbat nekabe, ya la 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 la, lecha dodi, ya la 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 la, likrat kala, ya la 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 la, b'nei Shabbat, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Now, continuing on with our next Psalm, Tzadik Katamar, page 140, Psalm 92. Tzadik Katamar yifrach Ke'erez balvanon yizkeh shetulim beveit Adonai bechatrot Eloheinu yafrichu odenu vun beseva deshenim verananim ihiyu lehagir ki ashar Adonai tzuri velo avlatabo. I'll now hand it right back over to Rabbi Dan.
We'll turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. Yitkadal vehitkadash shemei Rabba ve'almad yibrach chirutei ve'amlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uvchayei techol beit Yisrael ba'gala uvizman kariv ve'imeru Amen. Yehesh me Rabba mevarach le'alam u'le'almei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha brichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran Be'ama Ve'imeru. Amen. Turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu, beginning towards the top of the page. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed. Please be seated if you're still standing. We'll turn now to page 148. We'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uben laila, Adonai Tzvaot shemo. El chai v'kayam tamid yimlach aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, amari barabim. We'll turn now to page 150 and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Kihem chaynu ve'orech yameinu, ve'hem nege yomam b'layla. Bavatcha al tasir mimenu li'olamim, baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Israel.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol me'odecha. Vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'aderech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha Vehayu letotafot bein einecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvishearecha. Leman tizkeru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'yitem kiroshim lerohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liot lachem lelohim, ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, emet. Let's read in the English on page 157 at the top. Standing at the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt. That there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. Now you may notice this melody might sound familiar, and I think it's actually a very powerful matching up of the melodies, and so we'll see if afterwards, if you find the link to it, and then see if you can figure out what the connection there really is. Kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar ba'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים. זה אלי ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך. לעולם לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי ודע אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל 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 ישראל. Avadim hayinu. We were slaves and now we are free. And what's the first song that we sing? Mi chamocha va'ilim Adonai. We'll now continue now that we have been freed from Egypt, still with protection through the wilderness, with Hashkivenu on page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu lishalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu lishalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Ushmor tzeiteinu uvoeinu lichayim ulishalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu lishalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu lishalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim.
Okay, we'll turn to Vishamru on page 162 at the very top. Veshamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Einai beini uvein b'nei Israel Oti le'olam Isheshet yamim Asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz Uvayom ha'shevi Shabbat Shabbat vayinafar. In a moment, we'll start the Amidah together on page 164, and then we will give some silent time to pray your Amidah, however you choose. A couple things to note. First is that as we used to do this back in Zoom much more frequently, we want to make sure we give time for everyone to really be able to pray their Amidah without feeling rushed. So we'll give about 5 minutes or so for that to take place. Also, because it's Chol HaMoed, because it's Pesach, there is a small addition during the Ritzei prayer, which is on the Avodah prayer on page 174, just in the middle of the page where it says Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, and Sukkot, what's known as Yaleh V'Yavo. And yes, and as Kenter pointed out, yesterday during services in the morning, we switched from praying for rain to praying for dew. So you'll see that on page 168. So we're now Morid Hatal, part of the year. So certainly to add that as well. Thank you, Cantor. So as always, again, we'll begin together, page 164, and then continue silently from there. Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. you're still finishing when we die, you're welcome to continue. But for those that have finished, we'll close with Oseh Shalom, page 180 at the very bottom. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel. And we'll turn now to page 371 to offer our Mishaberach, and I'll read our Mishaberach list to begin with, and then Cantor Kevin will help us to lead Mishaberach again, page 371. Tonight, we're thinking in our community of Bensi Tepper, Alison Luckman, Malka Bat Chaya Sura, Michael Klinghoffer, Ame and Warren Cass, Rivka Bat Rachel, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Silvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sylvia Devora Bat Francis, Muriel Hirsch, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Shelley Newmark, Diana Axelrod, Gabriella Rose Spicer, Barbara Kushner, David Kyle Klopman, Lorraine Davis, Devora Batsima, Rebecca Snyder, Jeffrey Miller, Shelley Lyman, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Stanley Rappaport, Karen Layton, Debbie Bookfar, Carol Javna, Lori Nisanoff, Rebecca Rubin, Miriam Levy, Deborah and John Fogarty, Kate Kessler, Hilda Mintz, John Mahoney, Kim Birnbaum, Moshe Ben Yosef, and Moshe Jacobowitz. And of course, we invite those who are on the Zoom with us tonight, if you have additional names that you'd like to add into the chat, or simply to hold your loved ones in your heart. And we'll turn now back to Cantor Kevin, who will lead us in the Mishaberach, again, page 371.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mikor HaBeracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mikor HaBeracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Amen. Cantor Kevin, thanks so much. And thank you again for leading last week while I was gone. I really appreciate it. I know it meant a lot to everybody who participated. And really, it was a remarkable time away. I want to share some thoughts that are sort of running through my head, but they will be limited in one way, which is that next Shabbat, I believe it's next Shabbat, I'm going to double check, but I'm pretty sure, we're going to have some of the participants from the trip who are going to come and speak during Shabbat services from their own perspective. And I know that they have a lot to share, and I don't want to take away from that experience, and I don't know yet what it is that they're going to speak about. So I'm going to not go through the trip, point by point by point, but I'm going to try to give you a bit of a broad overview of what we were doing, where we were, and a couple of the most poignant moments for me that have me thinking about some things that I wanted to share with you tonight. So again, if this is all news to you, thanks to our wonderful Social Justice Committee, to one of our leaders in particular, Vivian Shapiro, who really, arranged for this trip for all of us to participate in. But certainly thanks to Andy and Alyssa, who are the co-chairs of our really wonderful committee, and put together this trip, which is a trip designed. It's called the organization itself is known as Etgar 36, which has its own explanation, which we'll do another time. But the basic principle of this trip is that it is a civil rights trip, which is a strange kind of title for anything in the first place. What does that mean, a civil rights trip? What does that mean to have an experience where you immerse yourself in the history of and the present realities of the fight for civil rights? So as a northerner, but with some southern ties, right? As most of you know, my great-grandfather was a rabbi in Atlanta. My grandfather grew up there, and most of my family grew up there on my dad's side. Otherwise, I'd say I've always had a distant kind of relationship with the South. Most of us that have not had an experience living down there or visiting there, other than Florida, which is its own country in many ways. It's a part of the world that I think many of us have a lot of preconceived notions about, some of which are accurate, some of which are actually off, and often significant kinds of ways. It is just as a broad statement, a reminder of how important it is when you can, if you have the capacity and the ability to do it, to travel. Not just to travel the world, but to travel this great country, because you inevitably see things that you otherwise would not see. You meet people you otherwise would not meet. Even if we just simply went and spent 4 days in the villages and the towns and the cities that we were in over the last, few days, we would learn a lot just by breathing and speaking and eating and doing all the things that one does when one travels. But this trip had a purpose in mind. And so its focus was, as I said, on both understanding the realities of what life in the South was like for enslaved peoples, what the civil rights movement's origins were, who some of its major players were, a little bit more of an understanding of the places where many of the events were happening that we oftentimes think about only in a sort of a related sense, right? Through movies, through television, through popular culture, through things that feel distant, right? All of these pieces coming together to try, in a matter of, let's see, really Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, not even a full day, right? Less than really 3-4 days, to try to teach a history that is as complex and as complicated and as nuanced as the story of the fight for civil rights. And I put that fight in quotations as a past tense statement. Okay, one of the first things that I think this trip disabuses us of is the sense that the civil rights movement was something that happened in history and is done. The reality is that the fight for civil rights began at a certain point in time, but it is ongoing. And I think while many of us may have understood that, I think I understand that in a different kind of way after this trip. So we began in Atlanta, and from Atlanta traveled to Montgomery, Alabama. So Montgomery, Alabama, again, for most of us, is sort of a dot on the map. If most of you didn't just travel there, if you could find it on a map, kudos to you. Not sure that I necessarily could have. It is a city with a rich history, its own somewhat unique culture, and of course, a significant role to play in the history of the struggle for civil rights, and especially for the experience of Reverend Dr. King. And of course, for the very famous story of Rosa Parks, of which most of us are familiar. But one of the first things that we experienced when we got to Montgomery and we went to the Rosa Parks Museum was sort of understanding that our kind of sense of who Rosa Parks was and what the bus boycott was about and how it began and how it was seen through to the end, is a tiny sliver and a reminder that actually the story is much deeper and the personalities are much more, in many cases, much more unique and interesting than I think we ever realized. We tend to caricature the greats in our stories. We think of them again as sort of, bit players in a larger narrative. But, Rosa Parks was a person with her own history, her own personality, her own feelings on what was going on. And as we learned, her sort of historic experience refusing to move to the back of the bus and what that ultimately spurred on could have been other people than her. And there were sort of situations in which it seemed that it might go in that direction. But as oftentimes is the case in history, a certain person finds themselves in a place in which they changed the trajectory of the lives of not just themselves and their city, but really the entire world. And again, this museum that was created to memorialize and to remember her, and to remember also to focus on what the bus boycott represented and the remarkable success of a really fully nonviolent protest to get what all of us would consider as a basic human right, which is not to be segregated in any space, let alone in a public space, let alone on a bus. And, again, while we sort of focus on the end result of it, the triumphant piece of it, to understand what it actually meant for the population, the Black population of Montgomery, Alabama, to go for as long as they did without access to a bus system, and to understand what the community had to do together to overcome the challenges that they faced. And those challenges were myriad, and they were faced in insidious ways, in public ways, and in much more subtle ways and ways that were behind the scenes. The struggle, again, from speaking truth to power, a lot of things that happen, again, are not the narrative that we hear or the story that we hear once it sort of boils down to what we see on the television or in a movie or read in a book. It's a remarkable museum, and one that really was quite telling. It sort of started off the trip, I think, in an important way, which is that it initially shattered, again, a lot of preconceived notions. And that continued through a number of our other experiences in Montgomery, and eventually in Selma, and then eventually in Birmingham, and then back to Atlanta. We visited what is now, did not exist the last time I did this trip 10 years ago, which is a remarkable monument and memoriam to victims of lynching. And it's worth looking up online and seeing really the detail that went into this museum. But of course, the immediate connection that most of us made was to Yad Vashem, and to what does it mean to create a physical structure to remember such terrible loss. And it was striking to walk through the space and to observe, again, countless names that were wiped from the earth in the most cruel and unimaginably cruel way, and lost forever. And, as became clearer and clearer as we went through this trip, realizing that those lives lost are not just those lives, they're the lives of potentially generations that would have resulted from it. So it's not just the obliteration of one generation, it's many. So to realize that, this was, again, within the last 10 years that this monument was created, or this, place of remembrance, it took that long. Okay. And one of the things that we realized, there's a big section of it that simply says we don't even know how many people in the end lost their lives to lynching. It's an inconceivable number. We only really observed the names that were known and researched, but there are countless others, as it was with the Holocaust, right? Names that will never really be remembered. So we were later in a museum that's tied to this from the Equal Justice Initiative, another really thoughtfully designed, remarkable museum in itself. And one of the most powerful experiences I had, I almost got in trouble, actually, because interestingly enough, it's a museum that prevents you from taking pictures, and with very good reason, I'm sure. But you reached a certain point in which, there's a giant brick wall. It's an original wall. This building was built where there had been slave trade done. And it says that basically where you're standing is a place where human beings were sold like property, that statement, while simple, was it hit me very hard. So I pulled my phone out to take a picture because I was lost in sort of thinking about it. And I, understandably got reprimanded for it, which I felt bad about, but it really stuck with me. Again, a lot of times when we speak about things in the abstract, when we're a distance away from it, it's harder to really conceive of what we're talking about. But when you really think about the idea that you're standing in the same place that people were led, men, women, children, families, beaten, led naked through the street. I mean, inconceivable things. It connects you to the place in a very powerful kind of way. I'll note also, which was really a lovely experience, our opportunity to daven, to pray in Montgomery in a wonderful Reform shul, older than ours, celebrated 150 years ago, 150 anniversary a few years ago. For any of us that have grown up in and around synagogues, would have felt immediately familiar in so many ways. And a lovely service, very welcoming to us and apparently to many other groups who come through. And of course, to hear the rabbi talk about the experience of what it means to be a Reform rabbi in Montgomery, Alabama. And I could just tell you again, obviously, for me, it's rare these days where I get to be just a Jew in the pew, as it were. But to sit there and to observe what the community looked like and to learn about its history and to understand that the Jewish community of the South is a strong and long-standing community, complex, right? As they pointed out, a lot of the Jewish communities in the South at that time, certainly weren't sure exactly where to be in the question of how much to be out front. Almost everybody agreed that slavery was terrible and that in the end, the fight for civil rights and for voting rights was something that needed to be overturned. But I think one of the things that we learned was that our image of sort of Jews pouring into the streets was not really the case in the South and even, quite frankly, in the North. Right, the number of actual people who went down and actually did the work was not a gigantic number. But in the end, the community itself has survived and thrived in some ways through all of these challenges and sees itself as part of, again, Montgomery's history and the history of the Jewish people of the South in general. And it was something that really intrigued me and something I want to study more and to understand more and deeper. I'm going to flash forward a bit because, as I said, there's so many moments. If I really dropped into each one of them, I don't even think an hour would suffice for each topic. But I want to jump actually to the end of the trip and to share something that was taught to us. So we had the privilege of being at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, as it happens on Palm Sunday. So my knowledge of Christianity is not great, but Palm Sunday is a significant moment in their cycle for sure. And so we were there for the Sunday morning service, the first service. There are two of them. They do a 9 o'clock service and 11 o'clock service, which is a remarkable thing in itself. And for those that have never been to a Baptist service, let alone one in the South, I will tell you, it's a remarkable thing. The energy is something that's very hard to describe. I would recommend, if you have sensitive ears, to wear earplugs of some sort because it can get quite loud. But the music was amazing, the spirit was incredible, and most importantly, the message of the day was profound. So we got to hear, he's not there every week these days because he is also a senator, but we got to hear the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock deliver the sermon, which, as it turns out, was part of a series of sermons that they had been giving at the church leading up to Palm Sunday and to Easter. And Good Friday and Easter. And the focus of it was on leadership, because as Reverend Warnock basically acknowledged and said out loud, as we can imagine, that one of the great challenges that we have right now, we've always had this to some degree, but especially right now, is a lack of clear leadership. And so he went on to define through various ways the kind of leadership that he and I think his parishioners feel is necessary in this time and really in all times. But there was one section that really stuck out to me, and I went back to rewatch it because they've taped every service. And he says as follows, and he's responding to what happened in Tennessee, earlier last week, and so much of what I had been feeling and having a hard time to articulate, he puts into really powerful terms. So he says as much. He says, "We are suffering so much these days from a vacuum of viable and courageous leadership. We need leaders, not people who just want to be seen, but people who are willing to serve. We need leaders, not people who just want to be out front, but real leaders. We don't need ego-driven, narcissistic personalities in love with themselves, but people with a heart for the people." He says, anytime 9-year-old children and the adults that show up for our children in a Nashville school can be blown away and the nation presses on as if this is normal, we move on, as he says, as if this routine carnage of children is necessary, that this is the price we must pay for some distorted understanding of certain freedoms. We need leaders. But what about the freedom to live, he says? The freedom to be able to drop your children off and trust that you will be able to pick them up at 3 p.m. He then reminded everyone in the room that there had been 129 mass shootings in our country just in 2023. Okay, not school shootings. There have been a few of those as well, but just mass shootings, 129 of them. And he says, anytime that this can happen again and again, and we have politicians who are bowing down and so concerned about their positions and their power, God knows, he says, that we need real leaders. And, this may seem like a different topic, right? What is, gun legislation? What do mass shootings, what do school shootings have to do with a trip to the South about civil rights? And they have everything to do with it. Because fundamentally, the civil rights movement, its main goal was to achieve what should be self-evident, that should happen naturally without any necessity for protest or march or confrontation or anything, which is simply to invest in every single person in this country certain basic human rights. Certain basic human rights. And they are basic, but they are essential. One of which is, as he says, right, the right to life. Okay, the right to life, the right to live, the right to be able to send your children to school without fear that they're going to be shot. And if we have a leadership, as we currently have, that cannot, in the face of this kind of destruction, this kind of carnage, do what it ought to do on its own, then that is where the people have to step in. In the end, the civil rights movement, right, was because of people. It wasn't because of the laws of Congress. It wasn't because of the president. It was because of people who refused to accept the reality that they had been laid before them. The leaders responded when the people stood up. And we should see that there is a tendency from the people in power that when the people stand up, to crush them back down again. We saw that in almost every stop along the way. We still see it, right? It's still a reality in the South. There is still a form of segregation that exists there. But if you really need a crystallized example, look what happened in Tennessee, right? Look what happened in this case in which you have protesters representing their people who have been stripped of their ability to actually serve and as elected officials. There are all sorts of nuances to this story, but one should understand, what were those leaders doing? What were they trying to do? Is to finally say, enough. You can't accept this as our reality anymore. You simply can't. And the courage of the people who lived and fought for civil rights who are no longer with us, or from those who are still there and we spoke to, or for those of us that are sitting here, right? The courage is not some gigantic thing. A lot of times it's as simple as saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. And if I have to, I'm going to march. And if I have to, I'm going to sit in. I have to write letters. Whatever it is that I can do, I'm going to convince the people who we have elected, the people who are our supposed leaders, to stop sitting on the sidelines, to stop being afraid of not winning the next election or not receiving the next check from whoever is sending it, but to put the basic civil human rights on the table and make that our goal, our unquestioned goal. So Reverend Warnock, if you have time, you should go back and listen to it again. The whole thing is on there. But here again is somebody who is both somehow a senator and a reverend of a remarkable church, and stands up in front of the world and says what he feels needs to be said. And again, not just from his own perspective, because he believes that is a core tenet of his faith. And I think that's an essential piece of it as well, as a rabbi of a community, to understand that while I try my very best to keep my personal opinions as something secondary, these are not personal opinions. Okay, what I'm talking about tonight has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the basic rights that were instilled in this world by our vision of our Creator, by our understanding within our religious tradition as deriving from God, that everyone is really deserving of, again, these basic things, if nothing else, the right to life, the right to be able to live without somebody taking your life from you in such a callous way, without treating people as property, without dividing people into categories based upon color of skin. It's absurd that it's even necessary to say these things, but clearly it is not just necessary to say them, it's necessary to scream them, to shout them until it is heard. And if there is one thing that I would say, I felt various parts of this trip where I felt as down as I could be, because I saw, again, things that I couldn't conceive were really possible for human beings to do to another. And yet at the same time, on the same trip, I felt as elevated as I've ever been. Because I hear things like this, right? People who dedicate their lives in so many different ways to continuing that struggle and to continuing to inspire all of us to do the work ourselves. So I hope actually that this won't be our last trip, that we'll be able to arrange some future trips. But even if you can't get on a trip and you can't go to the south, you can do a lot of learning and a lot of engagement right from your seat, right from where you are. Okay, but no more excuses. No more excuses. No more sitting on the sidelines. Okay, pick up a pen, write a letter. Pick up a phone, make a phone call. Okay, do what you have to do. But whether it's a fight for equal rights, an end to segregation, an opportunity for everyone to vote, or an ability to control the proliferation of guns into the hands of people with the intention to do harm, these are all things that must and need and can be solved and can be addressed and can be changed for the better. So with that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. And, again, look forward to next week, to next Shabbat, in which we'll really get a chance to hear again from some of our other participants who I know have a lot to share and a lot of things that we can do together as a community as we move forward. So before we get to Aleinu, as we're now in Pesach and looking already towards our next holiday of Shavuot, we're going to count the Omer. Sfirat Omer can be found on page 570, 570. So we'll begin first with a kavanah, an intention setter at the top, and then the bracha and the blessing, and then I will let us know what day it actually is in our count. Now, remembering again, the way that counting the Omer works is we count at night, but we're counting, right, that nighttime begins the next day. So we're fudging a little bit because it really hasn't turned to nighttime yet, but we'll assume, it's nighttime some. So again, page 570, you can join with me at the top. Hineni muchan umezuman lekayem mitzvat aseh shel sfirat haomer. I am ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. Our praise to you, Adonai, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to count the Omer. Hayom shenei yamim laomer. Today is 2 days of the Omer. So we'll turn now to page 506. I see Kevin looking and being confused, but it is in fact, because again, right, counting, it's it. But it's Omer is one of those great things. A lot of wonderful Jewish counting, that is for sure. Page 586, bottom of the page, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach, Ladon Hakol, Latet Gedula Liotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Keyoye Haratzot, Velo Samanu Kimishbechot Adama, Shelo Sam Chalkenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonaham, Vanachnu Korim, Umishtachabim, Umodim, Lifnei Mehelech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh, Baruch Hu. We're now on page 591. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayahom hahu yeh Adonai echad. Ushemo echad. Now invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit, if you so choose, to rise at home. Begin by remembering those who have passed in our community in recent months. Martin Blake, Morty Schwatzky, Beverly Deshevsky, Sandy Greenwald, Dorothy Klein, Buddy Kossoff, Emmanuel Kiprios, David Lieberman, Norma Polsek, Marvin Schreier, Sandy Slip, Larry Wartor, Rita Weitzman, and Yael Zerdar. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Istvan Benjamin, Gloria Bennett, Steve Bergman, Hilda Berger, Rachel Cherish, Rose Younger Cohen, Edith Dobson, Woodrow Emanuel, Jacob Falk, Mildred Gauze, Murray Hertz, Sylvina Kolinitsky, Anna Katz, Milton Kelmans, Hilda Kirshner, Jeanette Kopp, David Krotman, Helene Krotman, Bernard Mintz, Morris Newmark, Shayna Dina Kaplan Price, Sarah Quiros Ramirez, Bernard Reicher, Joseph Rothbart, Julia Scavron, Edith Schwab, Ruth Silber, Alan Silver, Max Silver, Paul Silver, Jacob Spitz, Henry Spitzer, Walter Vargas, and William David Weiss. In addition to the names that I just read, if anyone else is saying Kaddish and you'd like to add their names to the chat or simply say them at home or hold them in your hearts, I'll invite the mourners to join with me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayichon u'b'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ha'agalau v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevirach le'olam u'le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata b'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shalama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Zichronam libracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, please be seated. And again, just want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Thanks so much for joining us. Those that are watching on the stream, those that are with us on the Zoom. And just a reminder that services tomorrow will be back in person if you so choose, also on Zoom and streaming. But you can join Cantor Kevin and myself and our wonderful Howard, who is back in town, and Ann too, but Ann's not coming to shul. But Howard, for sure, we'll see you in the morning. And you're welcome to join us. And also a reminder that even though it's Chag, and even though we're not in our regular Torah cycle, we will have Torah study at noon, so you can join me at 12 o'clock on Zoom if you'd like. Also, just want to thank everybody for participating in the various ways that everyone participated during our Pesach Seder and arranging for people to be able to eat at each other's homes and for being part of services yesterday morning. And just a reminder that the end of the Chag is coming up as well. Wednesday, April 12th, 9:30, we'll have another service. This one, of course, includes the Yizkor service as well. So that'll be Wednesday, April 12th, 9:30 on Zoom only. And of course, really hope that you can join us for that as well. And as I said, just a reminder again that next Friday night, that some of the participants from our trip to the South will be part of our service, and we'll be talking a little bit about their experiences and their perspectives on the experience as well. Shelley put down a few pieces of building update, one of which very important, sidewalk. There's now sidewalk being installed, which is very exciting, and they're getting ready to pave the parking lot. So things start to look a lot more real when you have a parking lot, just from my experience. So we're very excited about that. And again, thank you to everybody who's working so hard on that. And, if you've been waiting to the last moment to make a contribution towards, now is as good a time as any. So I'm sure Neil would appreciate any help that you can provide beyond as we push towards those last few weeks. And again, our full anticipation is our first Shabbat service will be Friday night of May 5th. So, and if not, it's Neil's fault. No, I'm kidding. No, May 5th, we're going to be there and it's very exciting. So I think those are all my announcements. Cantor Kevin, we're going to switch back over to you for a closing song and then we'll do Kiddush. Here we go.
Fantastic. As I always like to do, I really wanted to try to pull something together. And I was thinking, I really wish I hadn't used Avadim Hayinu earlier. That would have been great. So I was looking through and I was thinking maybe connected to Shir HaShirim, which is what we read on Chag. But that didn't seem to jive well with the content that we just heard. And so I was almost out of ideas when at the very end I thought about where we're going to move to. So we moved to page 586 for Aleinu. And there's a version of Aleinu that Dan Nichols and Ellen Dreskin wrote, and it is fantastic. And it's a play on the very first word of Aleinu L'Shabeach, which is Aleinu. The translation in Mishkan Tefillah says, "Let us now praise Aleinu L'Shabeach." But that's a pretty poetic translation. Literally, al means it is on or it is upon. Aleinu it's on us, L'Shabeach, to praise, La'adon HaKol, etc. So they took that first word saying it's on us and used that to write this next piece. It's up to us to call ourselves to task, to sing what's good and true, to bring about redemption. It's what we were freed to do. For what's the point of being here if we're not moved to change our ways? Aleinu lishabeach. It's time to live our praise. We are carrying the stories of the ones who came before. What stories will be told of us when we are here no more? We commit ourselves to action. It brings meaning to our days. Aleinu lishabeach. It's time to live our praise. It's up to us to own the vision. We are an answer to a call. It's up to us to live the words we speak for the benefit of all. It's up to us to bow down deeply. There's a broken world to raise. Aleinu lishabeach. It's time to live our praise. Aleinu lishabeach. It's time to live our praise.
That was amazing. Trey, you came up with that like that. And you worked Ellen Dreskin in, which always just makes me really happy. That's awesome. Well done. Yeah, sure. So we're going to turn now to page 123 for Kiddush and page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava u'bratzon inchilanu zikaron l'maaseh bereshit Kihu yahom techila lemikrae kodesh zecher letziat Mitzrayim Ki v'hanu v'acharta ve'otahanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabat kodshecha ve'ahava u'ratzon inchaltanu Baruch ata Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Amen. L'chaim, everybody. I almost disappeared with my blurry background and everything. So I want to wish everybody again a big Shabbat Shalom. I'll put Cantor Kevin back up just so he can wish everybody Shabbat Shalom too. Anybody who wants to stick around for a minute on the Zoom is more than welcome to, but we'll say goodnight to our streaming friends. Again, services 9:30 tomorrow, in person, on Zoom, streaming, whatever you prefer. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Yeah, as I say, Warren, actually, you know what? I don't have any matzah with me. So if you have matzah, certainly should say your bracha before you eat it. But I ate all of our matzah.